The eastern Washington Territory stretched endlessly under the pale October sky of 1883, its rolling sagebrush hills broken only by the occasional stand of pine trees and the silver thread of Kettle Creek winding through the valley. Thomas Tom Morrison stood on his cabin porch, coffee cup in hand, surveying the land he'd claimed 15 years earlier, with nothing but determination and a government homestead certificate. At 40, Tom carried the weathered look of a man who'd spent 2 decades wresting life from stubborn soil. His graying brown hair showed traces of premature silver, testament to the isolation and hardship of frontier living. The nearest neighbor was 12 miles away, and the small town of Riverside Crossing lay 20 miles south, close enough for monthly supply runs, far enough to ensure blessed solitude. Tom preferred it that way, after losing his wife Margaret to pneumonia 5 years back, and their young son Timothy to scarlet fever the following winter. Solitude had become his refuge from memories too painful to share with well-meaning neighbors who couldn't understand the depth of his loss. His ranch wasn't much by territorial standards, 300 head of cattle scattered across 2,000 acres of government land, a modest cabin he'd built with his own hands, and a barn that housed 4 horses and enough hay to last the coming winter. But it was his, earned through sweat and sustained through sheer stubborn will. This morning started like any other. Tom planned to ride north to check on the cattle grazing near Wolf Ridge, repair some fence line damaged by elk, and perhaps hunt for the deer that had been raiding his vegetable garden. It was honest work that kept his hands busy and his mind occupied, but as he stepped off the porch toward the barn, an unexpected sound froze him in his tracks. Wolf howls, multiple voices rising in the distinctive harmony that meant a pack hunt was in progress. The sound came from the direction of Devil's Canyon, about 2 miles northeast, too close to his cattle for comfort. Tom quickly saddled his horse Rex, a reliable bay gelding with the steady temperament needed for frontier work. He loaded his Winchester rifle and checked his ammunition, knowing that a wolf pack bold enough to hunt in daylight might pose a serious threat to his livestock. As he rode toward the howling, Tom noticed something unusual about the wolves' calls. Instead of the ranging mobile voices of a pack pursuing prey across open country, these howls remained stationary, rising from the same location with an intensity that suggested the animals had cornered something they couldn't quite finish. The sound grew louder as Tom approached Devil's Canyon, a narrow gorge carved by centuries of seasonal flooding that created perfect conditions for ambush predators. At the canyon's edge, he dismounted and crept forward to observe the situation before committing to action. What he saw below made his blood run cold. 7 gray wolves had surrounded 2 small human figures pressed against the canyon wall. Even from 50 yards away, Tom could see that the trapped individuals were children, young boys, perhaps 7 or 8 years old, wearing the distinctive clothing that marked them as Apache. The wolves circled with patient hunger, occasionally lunging forward to test the children's defenses before backing away from desperate swipes with small knives. The boys stood back to back, protecting each other with the fierce loyalty of brothers, but Tom could see they were weakening from fear and exhaustion. Every rational instinct told Tom to ride away. Apache children in his territory meant Apache warriors nearby, and getting involved in tribal matters could bring deadly consequences to a lone white rancher. The smart choice was to report the situation to the territorial marshal and let federal authorities handle the complications. But as one of the wolves gathered itself for what looked like a final killing rush, Tom Morrison made the choice that would define the rest of his life. He raised his Winchester and fired. Tom's first shot took down the lead wolf mid-leap, the heavy .44-40 round dropping the animal just feet from the terrified children. The pack scattered in confusion, then regrouped with the wary intelligence of predators who understood they faced a new and more dangerous threat. "Stay down," Tom shouted to the boys as he worked the Winchester's lever action, chambering another round. The children couldn't understand his English, but they grasped his intent and pressed themselves lower against the canyon, while the remaining 6 wolves had turned their attention from the trapped children to this new adversary positioned above them on the canyon rim. Tom knew he had only minutes before the pack either fled beyond rifle range or organized an attack that would overwhelm his single-shot advantage. His second shot wounded another wolf, sending it limping away with a howl of pain and rage. The pack's discipline began to break as survival instincts warred with their desperate hunger. Tom used their confusion to work his way down the canyon slope, moving from boulder to boulder while keeping his rifle trained on the circling animals. "Come on, boys," Tom called softly to the children, gesturing for them to move toward him. "This way, slowly." The Apache twins moved with remarkable coordination for children their age, covering each other's movements and communicating through quick glances and subtle hand signals that spoke of extensive wilderness training. Despite their obvious terror, they maintained the discipline their people had taught them for survival in hostile territory. Tom's third shot scattered the remaining wolves entirely. The crack of the rifle echoing off canyon walls like thunder, the animals disappeared into the underbrush with the fluid grace of creatures perfectly adapted to this harsh landscape. But Tom knew they wouldn't go far. Wolf packs were persistent hunters, and the scent of blood would draw them back once the immediate threat passed. "We need to move," Tom said urgently, though he knew the children couldn't understand his words. He gestured toward his horse waiting at the canyon rim, then pointed to the boys and back to himself, trying to communicate that they would all leave together. The twins exchanged a rapid conversation in Apache, their young faces serious as they debated trusting this armed white man who had saved them from certain death. Finally, the slightly taller boy nodded and spoke what sounded like a formal acceptance in their native language. Getting too frightened, children and himself up the canyon slope with wolves, potentially regrouping, nearby required all of Tom's frontier skills. He moved them in stages, covering their retreat with the rifle while they climbed, then following quickly to the next defensive position. When they finally reached Rex, Tom faced a new challenge. The horse had never carried Apache passengers, and the scent of their different clothing and fear sweat might spook the usually steady animal. But Rex proved his worth as a frontier horse, accepting the additional burden with only a nervous whinny. Tom lifted both boys onto Rex's broad back, noting as he did that they were identical twins. Same dark hair, same intelligent brown eyes, same lean build that suggested good nutrition and careful raising. They weren't lost or abandoned children, but members of a family and tribe who would be desperately searching for them. "Hold tight," Tom said, swinging up behind them and gathering Rex's reins. As they rode away from Devil's Canyon, he couldn't shake the feeling that rescuing these boys had set in motion events that would change everything about his carefully isolated life. Behind them, the frustrated howls of the wolf pack echoed across the Washington Territory wilderness, a sound that seemed to carry a warning about consequences yet to come. Tom's cabin had never housed children, and the presence of two young Apache boys transformed the modest space in ways he hadn't anticipated. The twins sat close together on his handmade wooden chairs, their dark eyes taking in every detail of their rescuer's home with the careful attention their people taught from birth. "Let me see those cuts," Tom said gently, kneeling before the boys and examining the wolf scratches on their arms and legs. Neither child had suffered serious injury, but several wounds needed cleaning and bandaging to prevent infection. The taller twin, Tom decided to call him Left, since he sat to the left, spoke in rapid Apache to his brother, gesturing toward Tom's medical supplies. The second boy, Right, nodded and began rolling up his sleeves with the stoic acceptance of someone accustomed to necessary pain. Tom worked carefully, using warm water and clean cloth to tend their wounds, while trying to communicate through gestures and tone that he meant no harm. The boys endured his ministrations with remarkable courage, never crying out even when he applied stinging antiseptic to deeper scratches. "You're tough little men," Tom said approvingly, though he knew they couldn't understand his words. The respect in his voice, however, needed no translation. Both boys straightened slightly at his tone, recognizing adult acknowledgement of their bravery. As he worked, Tom studied his unexpected guests more carefully. Their clothing was beautifully made, soft deer hide decorated with intricate beadwork that spoke of skilled craftsmanship and family pride. Their hair was neatly braided with small ornaments that suggested ceremonial or special significance. These weren't random children lost in the wilderness, but important members of their tribe. "Somebody's going to be looking for you two," Tom murmured, finishing the last bandage. "And when they find you here." He didn't complete the thought, but the implications were clear. Apache warriors discovering their children in a white man's cabin could interpret the situation in ways that would end badly for everyone involved. The twins seemed to sense his concern. Left spoke in careful, halting English that surprised Tom with its clarity. Thank you. Wolves would have. He gestured to indicate death, then continued, "Our people will know you saved us." "You speak English," Tom said with relief. "That's good. That's very good. What are your names?" "I am Ayanna," Left replied, then gestured to his brother. "He is Dakota. We are sons of Chief Running Bear." Tom felt his heart sink. Chief Running Bear was one of the most powerful Apache leaders in Washington Territory. A man known for his intelligence, his fierce protection of his people, and his deep suspicion of white settlers. Having the chief's sons in his cabin was either the best possible outcome or the worst. "How did you end up in Devil's Canyon?" Tom asked. Dakota answered this time, his English slightly less fluent than his brother's. "We were hunting, following deer tracks. Got separated from our hunting party when storm came yesterday. Wolves found us this morning." "Your hunting party is looking for you?" Both boys nodded gravely. "All the warriors," Ayanna confirmed. "Father will send many men to find us." As if summoned by his words, a new sound reached them from outside, the distant thunder of many horses approaching at speed. Tom moved to the window and felt his mouth go dry at what he saw on the horizon. A dust cloud was rising from the south, larger than anything created by a normal search party. As it drew closer, Tom could make out individual riders, dozens of them, moving in the organized formation of Apache warriors on a military mission. "They're here," Tom said quietly. The twins ran to the window, their faces lighting up with joy and relief at the sight of their rescue. But Tom felt only the cold certainty that the next few minutes would determine whether he lived to see another sunrise. Outside, the sound of approaching hoofbeats grew louder, carrying with it the promise of a confrontation that would test everything Tom believed about courage, justice, and the possibility of understanding between peoples who had every reason to view each other as enemies. The boys were safe, but Tom Morrison was about to face the greatest challenge of his life. The sight that greeted Tom Morrison as he stepped onto his cabin porch would haunt his dreams for years to come. 300 Apache warriors arranged in perfect formation across his valley, their horses restless but controlled, their weapons visible but not yet raised in direct threat. At the formation's head sat a man Tom recognized from descriptions heard in Riverside Crossing, Chief Running Bear himself. A imposing figure in his mid-40s with the bearing of natural authority and eyes that missed nothing. The chief wore traditional Apache dress augmented with silver ornaments that caught the morning light, and his warhorse was decorated with symbols that proclaimed his high status within the tribe. Tom's throat went dry as he calculated the impossibility of his situation. 300 warriors against one man, armed only with a Winchester rifle and whatever ammunition he had in the cabin. If they chose violence, he would die within minutes, and nothing in his power could prevent it. But Chief Running Bear made no immediate move toward aggression. Instead, he sat motionless on his horse, studying the white rancher who stood alone on his porch with the kind of careful attention a man gives to an unexpected puzzle. Behind Tom, the cabin door opened and Ayanna and Dakota burst past him, running toward their father with joyful cries in Apache. The boy's appearance transformed the entire dynamic of the confrontation, and what had been a potential prelude to violence became a moment of profound relief and celebration. Chief Running Bear dismounted in one fluid motion and caught his sons in an embrace that conveyed months of worry, desperate hope, and overwhelming gratitude. The other warriors relaxed visibly, their tension easing as they witnessed the reunion they had all prayed to see. Tom watched the family embrace with mixed emotions. He was genuinely happy to see the children reunited with their father. But he also understood that his fate now depended entirely on what Ayanna and Dakota told their father about their time in his custody. After several minutes of intense Apache conversation between father and sons, Chief Running Bear approached Tom's porch with measured steps. His expression was unreadable, but Tom noticed that the chief's hand remained away from his weapons, a positive sign, but not necessarily a guarantee of peaceful intentions. "White man," Chief Running Bear said in clear, accented English, "my sons tell me you saved them from wolves." "Yes, sir," Tom replied, keeping his voice steady despite his racing heart. "Found them trapped in Devil's Canyon yesterday morning. Seemed like the right thing to do." "The right thing," the chief repeated as if testing the phrase. "Many white men would have ridden away. Why did you risk your life for Apache children?" Tom considered his answer carefully. knowing that his words might determine not just his own fate, but the future relationship between his people and Chief Running Bear's tribe. Because they were children in danger, Tom said simply, their race didn't matter, their need did. Chief Running Bear studied Tom's face for a long moment, then spoke rapidly in Apache to his assembled warriors. Tom couldn't understand the words, but he could read the body language as tension continued to drain from the formation. My sons say you tended their wounds with gentle hands, the chief continued.
They say you fed them from your own food, gave them blankets from your own bed.
They say you treated them as you would treat your own children. They're good boys, Tom replied. Brave and respectful. You should be proud of them. Something shifted in Chief Running Bear's expression at those words, a recognition of genuine respect rather than mere diplomatic politeness. He turned and spoke again to his warriors, then looked back at Tom with what might have been the beginning of a smile. Thomas Morrison, the chief said, surprising Tom by using his full name, you have given me back my sons. Honor requires that I give you something in return. What do you want? The question hung in the morning air like a challenge and an opportunity combined. Tom realized that his answer would echo through the territory for years to come. Tom Morrison stood on his porch facing 300 Apache warriors and their chief, holding his breath as he considered the most important question anyone had ever asked him. Chief Running Bear waited with patient dignity, but Tom could sense the weight of expectation radiating from every warrior in the formation. Chief Running Bear, Tom said finally, I don't want anything for doing what was right, but... He paused, choosing his words with extreme care. If you truly want to offer something in return, I'd ask for peace between your people and mine. Too much blood has been spilled on both sides. A murmur ran through the assembled warriors at Tom's words, some nodding approvingly while others remained skeptical. Chief Running Bear himself showed no immediate reaction, but Tom noticed that the chief's eyes had grown thoughtful. Peace, Chief Running Bear repeated slowly. This is easy to say, harder to achieve. Your people take our lands, kill our buffalo, break promises made in treaties. Our young warriors grow angry and strike back. How does one man's kindness to two children change such deep wounds? Maybe it doesn't change everything, Tom admitted. But it proves that understanding is possible. Your sons and I managed just fine without speaking the same language perfectly. We found ways to communicate, to trust each other, to work together. Ayanna and Dakota had been listening to this conversation with the intense attention of children who understand they're witnessing something historically important. Now Ayanna stepped forward and spoke to his father in rapid Apache, gesturing toward Tom and the cabin where they'd been cared for. Chief Running Bear listened to his son's words with growing interest, then nodded slowly and turned back to Tom. Ayanna tells me you have pictures of your own family inside your home. He says you looked sad when you saw them, but still gave kindness to strangers. He thinks you understand the love a father has for his children. Tom felt emotion threatening to overwhelm him, as memories of Margaret and Timothy rose unbidden. I had a wife and son once, lost them both to sickness. I know what it means to love family more than your own life. The admission seemed to complete some evaluation Chief Running Bear had been conducting. He spoke again to his warriors, this time at length, his voice carrying the authority of absolute leadership, but also the reasoning tone of a man explaining important decisions. When he finished addressing his people, the chief returned his attention to Tom with an expression that had subtly transformed from cautious evaluation to respectful consideration. Thomas Morrison, you ask for peace, but peace requires trust on both sides. Are you willing to prove your commitment to understanding between our peoples? How? Tom asked, though he suspected he wasn't going to like the answer. Come with us. Stay in our village for one season, autumn into winter. Learn our ways, teach us yours. Show both our peoples that cooperation is possible. The request hit Tom like a physical blow. Leave his ranch, his cattle, his entire life to spend months among Apache warriors who had every historical reason to distrust white men. It seemed like madness. But as Tom looked at Ayanna and Dakota, then at their father's steady gaze, he realized that Chief Running Bear was offering him something unprecedented. A chance to build genuine understanding between two peoples who had been locked in conflict for decades. My cattle, Tom began weakly, will be tended by some of our young men who understand such work, Chief Running Bear interrupted. Your property will be protected, your animals cared for. This I promise on my honor as chief. Tom looked out at the 300 warriors who had arrived prepared for war, but now waited to see if peace might be possible. He thought of Margaret, who had always believed that understanding could overcome prejudice, and of Timothy, who would never have the chance to grow up in a world where different peoples lived in harmony. "When do we leave?" Tom asked. Chief Running Bear's face broke into the first genuine smile Tom had seen from him. "Now, Thomas Morrison, we leave now and begin the work of building tomorrow." The journey to the Apache village took 3 days through some of the most spectacular and treacherous country Tom had ever seen. Chief Running Bear led the massive war party along ancient trails that wound through pine forests, across rushing streams and up mountain passes that tested both horses and riders. Tom rode near the center of the formation, officially honored as the chief's guest, but practically surrounded by warriors who remained curious about this white man their leader had chosen to trust. Ayanna and Dakota stayed close to Tom throughout the journey, serving as interpreters and unofficial ambassadors between him and the other Apache. "That mountain," Dakota explained on the second day, pointing to a towering peak crowned with early snow, "is called Where Eagles Touch Sky. Our people have hunted there for more generations than anyone can count." Tom studied the majestic landscape with new appreciation, beginning to understand why the Apache fought so fiercely to retain their ancestral territories. This wasn't just land to them. It was home in the deepest spiritual sense, connected to their identity and traditions in ways that went far beyond mere ownership. "It's beautiful," Tom said sincerely. "I'm starting to understand why you fight to protect it." "Understanding is the beginning of wisdom," said a new voice behind them. Tom turned to see an elderly Apache man riding up to join their conversation. The man's weathered face bore intricate tattoos, and his clothing was decorated with symbols that suggested great spiritual authority within the tribe. "This is Grandfather Stone Bear," Ayanna said respectfully. "He is our medicine man and keeper of the old stories." Stone Bear studied Tom with eyes that seemed to see through surface appearances to something deeper. "So you are the white man who saved Running Bear's sons without thought of reward?" "I am," Tom replied, unsure of the proper protocol for addressing Apache spiritual leaders. "The spirits whispered to me that this day would come," Stone Bear said mysteriously. "They showed me visions of a white man with a wounded heart who would help heal the wounds between our peoples." Tom felt uncomfortable with the mystical implications but tried to respond respectfully. "I don't know about spirits or visions. I just did what seemed right." "Sometimes," Stone Bear replied with a slight smile. "Doing what seems right is exactly how spirits work through us." On the third day, they crested a ridge that revealed the Apache village spread across a sheltered valley below. Tom counted nearly 200 teepees arranged in careful patterns that reflected both practical and spiritual considerations. Smoke rose from cooking fires. Children played in open areas between the dwellings, and the whole scene radiated the comfortable activity of a thriving community. "Home," Ayanna said with deep satisfaction, and Tom heard in that single word the same love and attachment he felt for his own ranch. As the war party descended into the valley, the entire village turned out to welcome them. Women ululated in celebration, children ran alongside the horses, and elderly men emerged from their lodges to witness the return of their warriors and the unprecedented sight of a white guest. Chief Running Bear rode straight to the largest teepee at the village center, where a woman Tom assumed was his wife waited with obvious relief and joy. The reunion between husband and wife and mother and sons was intensely moving, a reminder that beneath all political and racial differences, the love of family transcended cultural boundaries. "That is my mother, Dancing Moon," Dakota explained. "She has been very worried since we disappeared." Dancing Moon approached Tom after embracing her sons, her expression mixing gratitude with the natural wariness any mother might feel toward a stranger who had been involved with her children's welfare. Chief Running Bear spoke to his wife in Apache, clearly explaining Tom's role in rescuing their sons. As he talked, Dancing Moon's expression gradually shifted from suspicion to something approaching amazement. When her husband finished explaining, Dancing Moon stepped forward and spoke to Tom in careful English. "Thomas Morrison, you gave me back my children. In our tradition, this makes you family. You will stay in our lodge, eat at our fire, and be protected by our warriors as long as you remain among us." Tom felt deeply moved by the formal acceptance. "Thank you, ma'am." "I'm honored by your welcome." As the sun set over the Apache village, Tom Morrison found himself sitting around a communal fire, sharing food with people who had been strangers that morning but were treating him as an honored guest. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as he began learning to live among the Apache. But tonight he felt something he hadn't experienced in years, the warmth of belonging to a community that valued compassion over conflict. 3 weeks into his stay with the Apache, Tom Morrison had begun to understand that his rescue of Ayanna and Dakota had set in motion changes far more profound than he'd ever imagined. His presence in the village had sparked intense discussions about the possibility of peaceful coexistence with white settlers, dividing the tribe into factions that debated the future of their people's relationship with the expanding American frontier. Some of our young warriors think Father has lost his wisdom, Dakota confided to Tom one morning as they gathered firewood near the forest edge. They say trusting any white man is foolish, that all whites want only to take our lands and destroy our way of life. Tom understood their skepticism. The history of Indian-white relations was littered with broken treaties, betrayed trust and violence that left both sides suspicious of the other's intentions. His presence as a guest rather than a prisoner was unprecedented, and unprecedented things made people nervous. "What do you think?" Tom asked the boy. "I think," Dakota said with the wisdom that sometimes comes from children who've seen both kindness and cruelty, "that people are people. Some are good, some are bad, most are somewhere in between. Color of skin doesn't determine what's in the heart." The boy's insight impressed Tom, but he also worried about the practical implications of the tribal divisions his presence had created. Chief Running Bear was a strong leader, but even strong leaders could be overthrown by warriors who believed their survival was at stake. These concerns intensified when Tom witnessed a heated council meeting called by War Chief Striking Hawk, Running Bear's younger brother and leader of the tribe's militant faction. Though Tom couldn't understand all the Apache spoken during the debate, body language and tone made the conflict clear. Striking Hawk argues that whites cannot be trusted. Stone Bear translated quietly for Tom's benefit. He says your presence here is a trick to learn our defenses and lead soldiers to our village. He wants you sent away before you can report our location to the army. And what does Chief Running Bear say? He says you proved your intentions by saving his sons when you could have ignored their danger. He says sometimes trust must begin with one person willing to take a risk for peace. The debate continued for hours, with various warriors standing to voice their opinions. Tom noticed that the younger men generally supported Striking Hawk's position, while older warriors and most of the women seemed to favor giving peace a chance. Finally, Chief Running Bear rose to address the council with the authority of his position, but also the careful reasoning of a leader who understood that his people's future might depend on this decision. "Brothers and sisters," he said in English, clearly intending for Tom to understand, "we face a choice that will determine what kind of people we become. Do we remain locked in endless war with the whites, watching our children die in raids and battles? Or do we have the courage to explore whether another path might be possible?" He gestured toward Tom. "This man could have let wolves kill my sons. He could have turned them over to soldiers for reward money. Instead, he risked his life to save them and asked nothing in return but the chance to build understanding between our peoples. If we cannot trust such a man, then we cannot trust anyone, and we condemn ourselves to war until every Apache is dead." Striking Hawk stood to respond, his voice carrying the passion of a warrior who'd seen too many friends die in conflicts with white settlers. "Brother, your heart is good, but your judgment may be clouded by gratitude. This white man has learned much about our village, our numbers, our defenses. When he leaves, what stops him from leading soldiers back to destroy us?" The question hung in the air like a challenge, and Tom realized that his answer might determine not just his own fate, but the future of any peace between Apache and white communities. "May I speak?" Tom asked formally. Chief Running Bear nodded permission. Tom stood feeling the weight of 300 pairs of eyes evaluating his every word. War Chief Striking Hawk asks a fair question. "How do you know I won't betray the trust you've shown me?" The honest answer is you don't. Trust always requires a leap of faith. He paused, then continued with growing conviction. "But I'll make you this promise witnessed by everyone here. If I ever do anything to bring harm to this village or its people, may I die the most shameful death your traditions can devise. And if I keep faith with you, may this be the beginning of a peace that lets your children grow up in a world where Apache and white settlers can be neighbors instead of enemies. The formal oath seemed to satisfy even some of Striking Hawk's supporters. But Tom knew the real test would come not in words spoken in council, but in actions taken in the months ahead. December brought the hardest winter Washington Territory had seen in a decade, and Tom Morrison's commitment to living among the Apache was tested by conditions that pushed both him and his hosts to their limits. The village had prepared for cold weather, but the unusual severity of the storm strained their resources and forced everyone to make sacrifices. For the common good, Tom threw himself into the work of survival with the same determination he'd shown in building his ranch. He helped repair lodges damaged by wind, assisted hunting parties tracking game through deep snow, and used his knowledge of white construction techniques to improve the village's defenses against the brutal cold. "You work like Apache," observed Dancing Moon approvingly, as Tom helped her prepare deer hide for winter clothing. "White men in the towns, they sit by fires and complain when weather gets difficult. You understand that winter requires everyone to contribute." Tom had indeed learned that Apache survival depended on cooperation and mutual support in ways that individual white homesteaders rarely experienced. Every adult in the village had essential skills. Every task served the community's welfare, and waste or selfishness could literally mean death for everyone. "In my world," Tom explained, "we're taught that individual success is what matters most. A man takes care of his own family first, then maybe helps neighbors if he has extra resources. But here I see that helping the community means helping yourself too." The lesson became personal when Tom developed a severe fever during the worst blizzard of the season. For 3 days, he lay delirious in the chief's lodge while Dancing Moon and other village women tended him with traditional medicines and healing practices their people had refined over centuries. "You nearly died," Stone Bear told him when the fever finally broke. "Your spirit walked close to the land of the ancestors before deciding to return to us." Tom felt genuinely moved by the care he'd received from people who had every historical reason to let a sick white man die. "Why did you save me?" "Because you are family now," Dancing Moon said simply. "Apache do not abandon family." The winter crisis also revealed the depth of the village's internal divisions about Tom's presence. When food stores ran low in January, some warriors openly questioned whether feeding a white man was worth the resources he consumed. The criticism came to a head during a particularly difficult council meeting called to address the food shortage. War Chief Striking Hawk argued that every meal given to Tom was a meal taken from Apache children, and that the village's generosity was being tested beyond reasonable limits. "We are not a charity house for white men who want to play at being Indian," Striking Hawk said bluntly. "If Morrison wants to stay, he should earn his keep like everyone else." Chief Running Bear looked troubled by his brother's words, but Tom could see the practical truth in them. He had been living as a guest when the situation demanded that everyone contribute equally to survival. "War Chief Striking Hawk is right," Tom said, standing to address the council. "I've been taking more than I've given. That needs to change." He outlined a proposal that surprised everyone. Instead of remaining a passive observer, he would use his knowledge of white agricultural and construction techniques to help the village prepare for future winters. He would teach Apache craftsmen how to build better storage facilities, show them white farming methods that could supplement traditional hunting, and share his knowledge of metalworking and tool-making. "In exchange," Tom continued, "I ask only to be treated like any other member of this community, expected to contribute, but also supported when I need help." The proposal seemed to satisfy even Striking Hawk, who grudgingly admitted that Tom's skills could benefit the tribe. But the real test would come with spring, when Tom would have to prove that his promises were more than mere words spoken to avoid criticism. Outside the council lodge, the winter wind howled through the village with unforgiving cold. But inside, a white man and 300 Apache were taking the first tentative steps toward a partnership that could redefine the future of two peoples who had spent decades viewing each other as enemies. When spring finally arrived in the Apache village, it brought with it a transformation that surprised everyone, including Tom Morrison himself. The white rancher who had stumbled into the village as a reluctant guest had evolved into something unprecedented, a bridge between two worlds that had previously seemed impossible to connect. Tom's winter projects had exceeded even his own expectations. Working with Apache craftsmen, he had designed and built improved food storage facilities that would protect the village's supplies from both weather and vermin. His modifications to traditional building techniques had resulted in lodges that were warmer in winter and cooler in summer, combining the best of both Apache and white construction methods. Most importantly, he had established small experimental gardens that used white farming techniques to grow crops that could supplement the tribe's traditional hunting and gathering. The combination of European vegetables and Apache agricultural wisdom had produced yields that impressed even the most skeptical villagers. "You have brought new possibilities to our people," Chief Running Bear told Tom as they surveyed the thriving gardens on a warm April morning. "Some of our elders say this is the first time in 50 years that our village has looked toward the future, with hope instead of fear." But Tom's success in adapting to Apache life had created an unexpected problem. Word of his presence had spread beyond the village, and both white settlers and Apache from other tribes were beginning to take notice of this unusual experiment in cross-cultural cooperation. The first sign of external attention came when a delegation of Apache chiefs from neighboring tribes arrived to see for themselves whether the stories they'd heard were true. Tom watched nervously as Chief Running Bear welcomed his visitors with formal ceremonies that would determine whether his peaceful experiment would be supported or condemned by the broader Apache community. "They want to see if you are genuine," Stone Bear explained to Tom as the visiting chiefs examined his work and questioned villagers about his behavior. "Many promises have been made between white and red peoples. Most have been broken. These leaders need proof that something different is possible." The evaluation process was thorough and sometimes uncomfortable. Tom submitted to questioning about his motivations, his future plans, and his understanding of Apache traditions. He demonstrated his farming and construction techniques, showed the respect he had learned for Apache customs, and answered direct challenges to his commitment with patient honesty. The most difficult moment came when Chief Iron Wolf of the northern bands confronted Tom directly about white expansion into Apache territory. "Your people take our lands, kill our buffalo, force our children into your schools to forget their heritage," Iron Wolf said bluntly. "What makes you different from the soldiers and settlers who see us only as obstacles to be removed?" Tom felt the weight of centuries of injustice in Iron Wolf's question, and he knew that his answer would be judged not just on its words but on the sincerity behind them. "Chief Iron Wolf, I can't speak for all white people just as you can't speak for all Apache," Tom replied carefully. "What I can tell you is what I've learned living here, that your people have wisdom about living on this land that mine have forgotten, that cooperation creates more prosperity than conflict, that children like Ayana and Dakota deserve to grow up in a world where their mixed friendships are seen as hope, not betrayal." He paused, then continued with growing conviction. "I'm different because I've seen what's possible when people choose understanding over suspicion. I want my neighbors back home to see it too." Iron Wolf studied Tom's face for a long moment, then spoke rapidly in Apache to the other visiting chiefs. The conversation that followed was intense, with gestures toward Tom, the village improvements, and the thriving gardens that represented his contribution to Apache life. Finally, Chief Iron Wolf turned back to Tom with an expression that had shifted from suspicion to cautious respect. "Thomas Morrison, we have decided to support Chief Running Bear's experiment with you. But know this, you carry the hopes of many Apache people now. If you betray that trust, if you use what you've learned here to harm our people, the consequences will reach far beyond this village." The formal endorsement from the Tribal Confederation was both an honor and a burden. Tom realized that his personal choices would now affect not just his own relationship with Chief Running Bear's people, but the broader possibility of peace between Apache and white communities throughout Washington Territory. That evening, as the visiting chiefs prepared to return to their own villages, Chief Running Bear called Tom aside for a private conversation that would prove to be the most important of his life. "Thomas, my friend," the chief said, "winter is ending, and the time has come for you to choose your path. You came here as my guest, but you have become something more, a bridge between our worlds. The question now is, what will you do with that bridge?" Tom had been dreading this moment, knowing it would force him to decide between the life he'd built among the Apache and the responsibilities he'd left behind at his ranch. But as he looked around the village that had become his home, he realized the choice was clearer than he'd expected. "Chief Running Bear," Tom said slowly, "what if the bridge could extend both ways? What if some of your people came with me back to white settlements? while I continue to bring white visitors here to learn what I've learned. The proposal was audacious, a formal cultural exchange program that would allow members of both communities to live among their former enemies and build understanding through shared experience. You're talking about something that has never been tried, Chief Running Bear said. Thoughtfully, everything we've done together has been something that was never tried before, Tom replied. But look at the results. As spring turned toward summer, Tom Morrison prepared to return to his ranch, but not alone and not unchanged. With him would go 2 young Apache men eager to learn white farming and construction techniques, while behind in the village would remain 2 white homesteaders who had volunteered to spend their winter learning Apache survival skills. The experiment that had begun with a desperate rescue in Devils Canyon was about to transform into something unprecedented in the American West, a deliberate, systematic effort to build bridges between peoples who had been enemies for generations.